The 10-day period, beginning with Rosh Hashanah and culminating today with Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, is known as the Yamim Noraim, the days of awe, a time of year when we reflect on the life and the choices we make, what is important and what is essential, and what is extraneous, what we should keep and what we should discard, how we should live in the time allotted to us in the coming year, and what changes we should make in our lives. Change is never easy, but our prayers are meant to help awaken us to the need and the possibility of change. Our liturgy conveys the sense of awe, especially through the prayers we recite, such as the Avinu Malkeinu, where we appeal to God as both a parent and a ruler and ask him to have mercy and to deal kindly with us. It's coupled with the other prayer repeated these days, which we just chanted a little while ago, the Una Tana Tokef prayer, in which we ask who shall live and who shall die, and which asserts that we are judged and that the fate of all is determined at this time. This period has a second name. It's also called, in addition to Yamim HaNoraim, Aseret Yamei Tshuva, the 10 days of return, holding out the hope that we will recognize the dread conveyed by Yamim HaNoraim and the seriousness of these days, and then make the necessary course corrections to amend our ways and to do tshuva. These two concepts are reflected in the two different names, not only of this time of year, but they conflict and complement each other and are reflected in the parallel and two opposite characteristics of God's attributes. God is called El Malei Rachamim, the God who is full of mercy and compassion. And God is also referred to as a stern, impartial judge who insists on justice. Our sages tell us that is why God has two names, Adonai and Elohim. The contrasting aspects of God and of the two themes represented by the two different names of the holiday are somehow woven together to form a beautiful and powerful tapestry of these divergent notions, and they converge, and that's what makes Yom Kippur such a powerful and potent day. Writing in the Wall Street Journal, Yiddish scholar Ruth Weiss introduces a discussion of one of my favorite and best-known Yiddish stories of the season, if not higher, by the Yiddish writer Yud Lamed Peretz, who blends the themes conveyed by the dual names of God and the dual names of the holiday. She writes, "This intense concentration on one's regrettable actions can often inspire a resolve for teshuvah, return from one's iniquities." She writes about the zeitgeist of the early 20th century when the story first appeared, and she says, quote, "Since modernity seemed to lead Jews from religious faith to secular humanism, this time presented an opportunity to encourage Jews who had strayed from the path to return to the traditional way of life," end quote. Set in a small town in Eastern Europe, featuring a Hasidic Rebbe who is in the strange habit of disappearing every year during this days of judgment, precisely when his congregants need him the most and expect him to be present. But he's nowhere to be found, and they are not resentful of his absence. They assume the best. Whenever anyone asks where their Rebbe is, since he's not in shul with him during these days, they state with certainty, where else would he be but in heaven, interceding on our behalf at God's holy throne? Well, it just so happens that one year a skeptic arrived in the shtetl, and when he asked where the Rebbe is, and they give their pat answer that he's in heaven, he doesn't believe what they tell him, and it scoffs at their naivete. Determined to prove the simplistic believers how mistaken, naive, and foolish they are, he sets out to learn the truth. So he goes and he hides under the bed of the Rebbe to see what he does and where it is that he really is going. He observes the Rebbe rise before dawn and dress in peasant clothing. The skeptic surreptitiously follows him into the forest and watches him from afar, only to see the Rebbe now doing something he was not expecting him to do, chopping wood and binding branches for firewood. Now he's really puzzled. and even more so when he observes him going to the home of a poor widow at the outskirts of town. Still in disguise, the holy man gives her the wood, places it in the earth, and lights the poor woman's fire, mumbling the morning slichot prayers as he does. When she says she has no money to be able to pay him for the wood, he tells her not to worry. He can be paid at a later time. So after seeing where the Rebbe really goes and what it is that he really is doing, the doubter is transformed, or at least his opinion of the Rebbe is changed. Now, he does not reveal the secret and what he learned to anyone, but returning to the synagogue, whenever he hears someone praising the Rebbe's annual ascent to heaven, and when they say he's up in heaven, he murmurs and says, if not higher, im lo lamala mizeh, if not higher. Such a beautiful prayer and story. Although Peretz leaves us wondering if the skeptic has become a believer, with those few words, without revealing what it is that he has witnessed, it is as if the outsider has become the Rebbe's disciple. Ruth Weiss sums it up. The skeptic who discredits supernatural belief is won over by the act of human kindness, performed anonymously and in secret by the observant religious rabbi who is acting on Judaism's humanistic humanitarian ethic. So as the story poignantly illustrates, having experienced the power of religion and the good it can do, he now is a part of a community of believers, even though he may or may not be. As I once heard a rabbi say, when people ask if one believes in God, the better and more important question to ask is whether God is real in our lives. That's the power of our heritage and of the season, with its message of it being a time of awe and of judgment, of engagement, when we are implored to make God real in our lives, to bring our ethics to life, to be conscious of our actions, to think about the connections between belief and our actions. To give you a sense of the power of this season, I want to tell you about something I did the other day. Something, it really was kind of crazy. And I'm kind of hesitant to tell you about it. But I will, but just don't tell anybody. Keep it between us. I did something I doubt anyone has ever done. Earlier this week, when I was at home, busy working on my sermons for the holiday, my concentration was interrupted when I got a call from a telemarketer. Now, we have a call blocker, which usually intercepts most calls, so they don't go through. But this one got through. I didn't know who it was, so I answered, and shortly after the person identified herself, and I realized it was a cold robocall, I said I couldn't speak. When she asked when would be a better time to call back, I discontinued the conversation by abruptly hanging up so I could get back to work. A few seconds later, I started to feel bad. I thought to myself, this wasn't just a recording, it was an actual person on the other end of the line. I shouldn't have disconnected so quickly and impolitely without some kind of explanation. So guess what? Since we have caller ID, I actually called her back. Who ever calls back a telemarketer? And as it turns out, I got a recording. And I wasn't able to speak to anyone or to leave a message. So whoever you are, and if you're here today, I want you to know I'm sorry for hanging up on you, and I don't want you to take it personally. But that's the power of this season, that we reach out to strangers, even telemarketers, if we heed the call of our liturgy. So my friends, if to strangers and telemarketers, al achad kama v'chama, how much the more so to those we know, those we love, and those we care about. This is a time not to put off contacting and connecting with those people, those relatives and friends and loved ones with whom we may have had a falling out, or from whom we may have become estranged or distant. The middle-aged son of my closest friend in rabbinical school died suddenly over a year ago. Now, he's on the West Coast and I'm here, and it's been a few years since we last spoke and saw each other. So I didn't learn about it, the death of his son, until about a month or two later. And while I wanted to reach out and call him, I wanted to wait for the right time. But as so often happens, life got in the way of living, and I didn't call. Weeks turned into months, and with the passage of time, I was concerned it would now be awkward to suddenly call him out of the blue. I worried that too much time had passed, so I didn't call. And before I knew it, a year had passed. But this being the time of Teshuvah, Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, of turning and returning, I gave him a call a few weeks ago, just before Rosh Hashanah. There was no answer. The call went to voicemail. And I left a message, therefore, for him and waited for him to call me back. When I didn't hear back from him, I assumed the worst, and it was because he must be upset with me. Stop and ask yourselves, how often do we build up in our own minds and imagine the worst? Or make assumptions about what the other person is thinking? We project our thoughts as to why a person responds or doesn't respond, when what we should do is give them the benefit of the doubt. And then resentment can fester and build up. And there's a remedy for this. The remedy is communication, not silence. So when he didn't return the call after a week, instead of allowing my imagination to speculate why he hadn't called, or giving up and rationalizing and saying to myself, well, at least I tried, I called him. Instead, I went and I called again. And then, when I finally reached him, he told me he'd been away in a place with bad cell service for the last week and apologized for not getting back to me. I felt relieved, proving how important it is not to allow your imagination to run away with you and to build up assumptions. And when we finally did speak, I apologized for not calling sooner and told him my concern about calling and my hesitancy to do so. And immediately, he set me at ease. He told me how glad he was to hear from me, to hear my voice, and how comforting it was to speak, and how much it meant to him. My friend reassured me and immediately said, Stuart, it's never too late, affirming in an email that I got from him the very next day, I so much appreciated your call. It was wonderful to reconnect with you. I learned an important lesson, my friends. It's never too late to reconnect. Now is the time to reach out, to make that call. Just wait until the holiday's over to make the call. We are so fortunate to have the holiday of this season to remind us of our values, our priorities, of what is important and what is not important, who is important, and that it's never too late. We're told that the gates of Teshuvah are always open. There's never a bad time to turn and return. At the end of the day, my friends, it's all about friendship and relationships and love. There's a story about a barber who tells his customer that a 12-year-old standing outside the barber shop is not very bright. So the barber says, I'm going to prove it to you. So he shows the kid a $1 bill and a $5 bill and asks the kid to choose one of them. The kid takes the $1 bill and leaves the shop. A little later, the customer sees the boy on the street as he's coming out of an ice cream store and asks him, if you don't mind my asking, young man, why didn't you take the $5 bill? And the boy takes a lick of the ice cream cone he just bought with the dollar he got, and he answers, because the day I choose the $5 bill, the game is over. Think about it. So one way to understand the story, I think, is to see the importance that that child understood of being in relationship. He instinctively understood that playing the game was more fun and rewarding than actually winning, because the moment he wins, he actually loses. From this, we can learn that there are times when, by striving for more or too much, we might wind up losing the game altogether. And I think it reminds us that we should play and enjoy playing the game of life for as long as we can. One of the reasons why clergy dress in white on the holidays is not just as a sign of purity and to evoke a sense of spirituality, but to mimic the shroud, the simple white linen in which we are buried. It's just one of the many ways in which the holiday is meant to remind us that our time on earth is finite, so that we can think about our mortality in order to think about how to live the days allotted to us, because the game of life is not infinite and does not go on forever. Now, we've all heard times that there are times when life imitates art, a famous saying, but rarely does life imitate the punchline of a joke. But on a rare occasion, it does. First, I'll tell you the joke. A rabbi, a minister, and a priest went into a bar after a round of golf. I thought I might as well pack all of the scenarios in the same joke. So after a couple of drinks, they started talking about what they would like said about them when they were lying in their coffin at their funeral. So the minister started to think, and he said, I would want people to speak about how much I did to help the people in my church and how I was always there for them in their time of need. And the priest said he would want to be remembered for how much he did for the poor in his community and his commitment to social justice. So then they asked the rabbi what he would want people to say at his funeral. And the rabbi replied, I'd want them to say, look, he's moving. The rabbi always gets the punchline. You know that? So it's a great punchline, a great joke, but I immediately thought of that when I came across the following news story earlier this year, and I quote, Bella Montaya, 76 years old, was declared dead by a doctor at a hospital in the city of Babahoyo, Ecuador, last week. And then, I don't know if somebody said, look, she's moving, but listen to this. According to the article, when mourners attending her wake heard her knocking on her coffin, she was immediately rushed back to the hospital for treatment. It turns out she had been declared dead on June 9th, and she was placed in a coffin and taken to the funeral parlor. And after almost 5 hours inside, she gasped for air after her relatives opened the coffin to change her clothes for the funeral. True story. Now, apparently she experienced a rare condition called catalepsy. Never heard of that before. Anybody ever hear of it? It's a condition where a person experiences seizure, loss of consciousness, and the body becomes rigid, which is why she was assumed to be dead. 7 days later, she did actually die. And then she really was buried in the same funeral home and at the cemetery. Now, you can make of the story whatever you want. One interpretation might be, it's not over till it's over. But again, as I said, nothing lasts forever. That's why the psalmist captured the ephemeral and transitory nature of life with images that we just recited, that are incorporated into our liturgy. He compares our days to a fleeting shadow, withering grass, a fading cloud, a fleeting breeze. Earlier, we recited the portion of our service known as Yizkor, when we remember our beloved departed. Our rabbis very wisely devised a graduated system of mourning. We begin with the intensity of Shiva. Shiva, which comes from the Hebrew word for Sheva, which means 7. Doesn't mean 1, doesn't mean 2, doesn't mean 3, it means 7. 7 days of mourning that we set aside as a time to refrain from work, from our normal activity. It's followed then by Shloshim, the period of 30 days, when we begin to resume our activities, but things are still a little bit different, and then for the year, when we refrain from attending festive celebratory events. And eventually, there's Yartzeit, the anniversary, and Yizkor, the memorial prayers we just recited. The point of our guided practice and rituals is to help us navigate life, so we do not remain mired in sorrow, self-pity, or withdrawal from the world. It's the same reason days are designated in the Hebrew calendar to mourn the loss of the temple. The rabbis were concerned that the experience was so traumatic, the people might want to mourn the loss of the temple every single day of the year. So what they did was to confine it to a specific period of time known as the 9 days in the month of Av, culminating in Tisha B'Av. The Jewish comedian Mel Brooks instinctively understood this. Earlier this summer, I read his autobiography. I love the title. It's called All About Me. So he writes what happened when Mike Ockrent, the director of the show, The Producers, died suddenly before its pre-Broadway tour. All of their plans were now altered and hung in the balance as they had to scramble quickly to find a director for the show. So Brooks decided the best person to take over was Mike's wife, Susan Stroman, who had worked with him and them on the show and knew it better than anyone. Overcome by her loss, though, she refused his overtures and requests, saying she was so depressed, despondent, and devastated by her husband's sudden death that she spent all day in her apartment crying. So Mel went to her apartment on several times, and he sat with her, and she cried, and she continued to rebuff his request to become the director. Suddenly he had an idea, and after a few days, he went to see her. He grabbed her by the shoulders, and he said to her, "You can't go on like this. You can't just sit here and cry all day, every day. I need you to direct the play. Here's what you'll do. You'll wake up, you'll cry in the morning, then you'll come to rehearsal, and then you can go at home and you can cry again." Can you picture Mel Brooks saying that? The next day she called him and she said, "Okay, I finished crying this morning. I'm going to come in. I'm ready." And he reports that she came to the theater, directed the rehearsal, went on to win Tony Awards for it. And then she went home to cry again. And urging her to come, he said to her, "It's not only good for us and good for the show, but it's good for you." And he was right. In many respects, that is what Shiva and the gradual stages that follow are meant to do. Coming to shul and being a part of a congregation and of a community. So we can recite Kaddish, which can only be said in the presence of other Jews, which can only be done in the presence of a minyan, is meant to give us the framework so that we are not alone at our time of loss and of mourning. So we can cry, but then eventually resume our lives. Our sages in heritage understood humans are not meant to dwell in solitude, but to be comforted by and in the company of others. I once saw a cartoon with two guys holding identical signs, the same words emblazoned on both of them. One of them, they both said, "Live today as if it's your last." But one had at the top, "Rejoice, live today as if it's your last." And the other said, "Repent, live today as if it's your last." So which one is it? It's both. It's both, which is why this is known as both the Yamim HaNoraim, the days of all, and Yemei Tshuva, the days of return and of repentance. So in the spirit of two of my favorite movies, Oscar award-winning movies, Crash and Slumdog Millionaire, which both present seemingly unconnected, disparate vignettes, which at the end come together and are connected in a common theme. I like to tie together the various common themes in the stories I've shared this morning. And that is, the lessons are, make your faith and your belief real by doing acts of kindness for others. Use the days ahead to reach out to loved ones. Don't wait. Turn to those you love. For loved ones, friendships and relationships are what life is all about. And that's what really counts. As the Beatles put it, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. And so I conclude with a beautiful poem called "Slow Down" by David Witherford. Have you ever watched kids on a merry-go-round or listened to the rain slapping on the ground? Have you ever followed a butterfly's erratic flight or gazed at the sun into the fading night? You better slow down. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last. Do you run through each day on the fly? When you ask, "How are you?" do you wait to hear the reply? When the day is done, do you lie in your bed with the next 100 chores running through your head? You'd better slow down. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last. Have you ever told your child, "We'll do it tomorrow," and in your haste, not see his sorrow? Ever lost touch, let a good friendship die, because you never had time to call and say hi? You'd better slow down. Don't dance so fast. Time is short. The music won't last. When you run so fast to get somewhere, you miss half the fun of getting there. When you worry and hurry through your day, it's like an unopened gift thrown away. Life is not a race. Do take it slower. Hear the music before the song is over. Amen.